alongside, once again, to the Washington Times District of Sports podcast. I'm George Gerbo. A reminder that you can find all of our sports coverage at washingtontimes.com/sports and on Twitter at WashTimesSports, where you can find the work of our excellent sports reporters, and that includes Matt Paras, who joins me once again. Matt, welcome back. Good to have you as always.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a minute, feels like.
It's been a little bit. We got busy in the month of October as everything kind of converged a little bit. You know, on the road back-to-back weeks with the Washington football team, Maryland football. Finally came back home. Didn't do much better, but they're still trying to find 6 wins for a bowl game, and that's a subject for a little bit later on down the line for the next District of Sports podcast. But we'll talk Wizards and we'll talk Caps, who have got their season started too. We will start, Matt, with the Washington football team, who comes off of a bye week at 2-6 on the season. And if you're a Washington fan, not where you expected them to be. We expected a little bit of regression here and there, but probably not as much of the regression as we've seen with the WFT so far. Unfortunately for them, also coming off a bye week is Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who come to FedEx Field this weekend. And you can imagine it won't be anywhere close to what it was last season in the playoffs when Taylor Heineke made his debut and had a chance to knock off the Buccaneers, but Tampa Bay won that game and went on to win the Super Bowl. This season for Washington, uncharacteristically, after what we saw based on last season, has been the play of Washington's defense, which has undergone a lot of heat this week. Chase Young, in probably my favorite moment of the week. Chase Young, people, is out there to get that paper. He was easy. If you've turned on a television or watched football on Sundays, you've seen him in Under Armour ads. You've seen him in Old Spice commercials. And he was asked this week, Matt, in one of your media availabilities, if, is that distracting you? The classic guy can't do 2 things at once. Is it distracting you from being in all these commercials and, being a little bit of a celebrity in terms of the league? And he said, I'm just out there. I'm just making money, baby. Got to get that money. And I can understand that. I can relate to that.
No, I mean, so full disclosure, I was the one who asked him the question. And, what I was getting from, it wasn't necessarily he's free to do whatever he wants in the offseason. I mean, heck, they're playing Tom Brady this weekend, and that guy is in all sorts of commercials. All he does is win games. So the commercials themselves are not the issue. It's just like, does he think, I was curious to see whether he either mismanaged his time at all or didn't go about his training the right way or anything like that. I mean, I didn't really expect him to say, like, yes, I did mismanage it. And I don't necessarily think he did. But, I mean, if you search Chase Young commercials on Twitter, you'll get snarky comments, snarky comments saying, like, Chase Young has more commercials than sacks. It has been some criticism toward him. And I think that's the thing we're seeing with Chase Young this season is he's facing more criticism than he's ever had to deal with before. There was a little bit last year, but not nearly to this degree. And so, yeah, he's had a slow start to the season. He only has 1.5 sacks. Sacks aren't everything for a defensive lineman, but he's not creating that type of production as he certainly did last year or what you would want from the second overall pick from a year ago.
And very specifically, he does have more commercials than sacks at this point. But again, not that matters, but he's got at least 2 commercials and only 1.5 sacks. But I like how, I mean, your story is completely fair because you bring up the point that last season through 8 games, and of course, pandemic and everything, we know that, but only 3.5 sacks last season through 8 games. So maybe it's a case of starting slow and getting into a rhythm or what, but I don't think it's fair to put everything on Chase as a defense. And of course, it does start up front. The pressure up front is going to lead to quarterback being flushed out of the pocket and being hurried and et cetera and et cetera. Washington's defense overall is just having a completely reversal of fortunes where they were a top 5 defense last year. They are now a bottom 5 defense through 8 games and through 9 weeks in this season, Matt.
Yeah, it's really the worst case scenario for them. I mean, we talked about before this season, if this defense suffered any drop off, well, anything outside the top 10 would probably be a disaster for them. And the offense has been a little bit better than expected, but I think they've come back to earth in recent weeks, especially with the injuries. And so the secondary in particular has been a bit of a mess. It's played a little bit better lately. I think the last 3 weeks have kind of been encouraging if you're looking for silver linings, but it doesn't seem like they're still on the same page. And I don't know if it necessarily like a turnaround is in the cards or anything like last year. And they have a heck of a test this week with the Buccaneers. If granted, if guys like Chris Godwin actually play, I think he's questionable for this upcoming game. So we'll see. But Tampa has a really talented supporting cast.
Yeah, if you've watched this, if you're a Washington fan and you've watched this team pretty much since the end of the Kirk Cousins days in Washington, you've expected this team is going to kind of max out somewhere in the, at least what I call the 14 to 24 point range. Like that is kind of their range. And if they perform above that, they've got a really, really good chance to win. If they perform below 14 points, they're probably not going to win. The last 3 games, 13, 10, and 10. And it's this defense that has to bring them along, because in the games they do win this season against the Giants and Washington, that Giants game, we know the whole debacle at the end with the Giants having a chance at making the field goal, and they only win that game by a point. In Atlanta, the offense looks spectacular, but it takes till the end of the game to get there, and they only win that game by 4 points. These other games in the margins, where if Washington scores 17 to 24 points, you almost as a fan, based on how they've played in the last 2 seasons, are conditioned like, okay, they got a chance here because the defense is good. Well, the defense hasn't come around with that. They're last in the league in passing yards allowed, and overall in scoring rated 29th. And for a team, like you said, the offense is coming around and getting there, and there's some bright spots, but Taylor Heineke still plays at time. The Packers game sticks out as a game that Washington had some chances in, especially coming out of halftime. And he played like a guy that he grew up in. He wears the number 4 for Brett Favre. He plays sometimes like Brett Favre in terms of the way he throws. But if you're not going to score 27 to 35 points a game for this team, then the defense is the backstop for that. And when that hasn't happened this season, I think is what is causing Washington to not be able to win some of these games. Because they could be, I don't think overwhelmingly over the top amazing, but they could be closer to a 500 team and maybe be in contention in the NFC in a wild card spot. And now you're at 2-6 and you're in the bottom half of the league.
Yeah, just look at that third wild card spot right now. That's the Atlanta Falcons, who Washington beat. The Falcons are only 4-4, so if even if Washington was 3-5 instead of 2-6, this might be a different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but they have dropped some winnable games. And there's just been so many so many dysfunctional plays. I'm thinking of the Hail Mary in the Saints game. Just so many things that have really stalled them this year when the game has seemed in reach. Even in Denver, that the second half, the fourth quarter with Melvin Gordon driving. But yeah, no, it's really just the offense isn't good enough to carry the defense's lapses. And when the defense has started to play better, then the offense hasn't been good enough to make up for their progress. So it's just kind of it's one thing or another in this case.
Didn't think there were enough storylines in the season as it goes on. Of course, Tom Brady visits Sunday, and then lo and behold, Ron Rivera homecoming to Carolina, and guess who is back under center for the Panthers after a Sam Darnold injury? Yes, it's Cam Newton, and so we'll have a reunion in 2 weeks in Charlotte. So get excited for that, as the road doesn't get any easier, literally and metaphorically, for Washington as this season goes on. Let's take a look at basketball, Matt, and the surprising Washington Wizards. If you have remnants of anybody from the 2020 edition of the Los Angeles Lakers, you're doing good in the Eastern Conference. The Wizards and Bulls are at the top of the Eastern Conference standings, ahead of the Nets, ahead of the Sixers and the Heat, and last year's champion Bucks. And they've got, you've got remnants of both teams. You've got Alex Caruso. He's in Chicago now. And of course, Washington pulling off the trade in the offseason, sending Russell Westbrook to LA, and getting back Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Montrezl Harrell. and Kyle Kuzma, and a draft pick out of that. So if this sticks here for Tommy Shepard, it's up for all time trade best trades in NBA history if it works out. At least getting the Wizards to a playoff spot and maybe a top 4 seed, but that's way down the line. Just looking at this team, Matt, in these first couple of weeks of the season, it's really been the defense that's helped out as opposed to what the football team is doing. The Wizards defense is what's keeping them in this. They're top 10 in blocks. They are top 10 in defensive rating, and they are the best defensive rebounding team per game in the NBA. And it's something that we didn't see as much last year. I don't want to say they were undersized, but like the kind of guys that they had around Russ and Brad Beal last year were just not those type of dudes. They wanted Rui Hachimura to grow into that type of role. He is still not with the team and still unclear when his situation is going to be resolved and that he'll rejoin Washington. But even without him, and now with a healthy Denny Adbia and adding in these 3 major pieces from the trade, the Wizards got a lot tougher, and they got a lot more heart to them, at least as it looks watching this team through the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's really it's incredible how deep they are. I mean, we talked about the Westbrook trade up top, and that really has just given them so many pieces of what they've missed last year. Like I think of last year's team and specifically how bad they were on defense. They didn't really have anyone who could defend on the wing and no one who could defend the paint. And I think the paint is still a little bit of an issue for them. I mean, Daniel Gafford is he's your rim protector, but he only plays 20 minutes a game or so because he has foul trouble issues and stamina issues. And Harrell is doing such a good job. You want to keep him on the floor. So without that lack of size, you really have to clamp down on the wings. And you look at the additions they brought in. Contavious Caldwell-Pope has been excellent for them on the wing. Kyle Kuzma, his defense has really dramatically improved over his career. And so, he's been excellent this season. Even a guy like Spencer Dinwiddie, who was more known for his offense, I think he's been solid in, helping contain interior point guards from driving and stuff like that. And, I think you got to give a lot of credit to Wes Unseld Jr., the coach, because he's really gotten Bradley Beal to commit to defense again. And that was not the case under Scott Brooks. Scott Brooks wanted Beal to be the offensive burden in a sense. And because there was so much on his shoulders offensively, Beal couldn't really commit to the defensive end as the way that maybe he should have. So, yeah, they're playing all around team defense. And the stat that stood out to me is, I looked it up the other day, is I think they teams are shooting the worst percentage from 3-point range against Washington. And it was only 29%. And, you could say luck goes into that. Maybe they're missing open shots, so on and so forth. But they were allowing the third fewest 3-pointers in the league as well. So they're doing a really good job of running guys off the lines, preventing those looks in the first place. And so I think that deserves a lot of credit. And that specifically is scheme and paying attention to detail. And that's where the upgrade of Wes Unseld from Scott Brooks comes in.
Yeah, the transition in systems is stark just watching these games because, last year they're running up 130 points and 140 points against teams like the Nets, and they're losing, and they're winning some of those games, and they're losing some of those games against teams like the Nets and the Hawks, where they ran up these massive, scores in the way that offense has proliferated in this league in the last 5 to 10 years. But these games, I don't want to say traditional sounds like a weird word to use, but I don't have a better one. It looks more like traditional basketball. They're winning games 115 to 87, 98, 93, and that's because of what they're doing on the defensive side of the ball. And they've just got my biggest thing last year in watching this team was, I get what they were trying to do. And, you send John Wall out and you're kind of in a transition point, but you've got enough pieces to, maybe make a playoff appearance. And just the guys on the floor just, again, this is not really quantifiable, but didn't look like NBA ready guys. And that's fine. They were young guys, but I think this team would have benefited last year from having more of these just Spencer Dinwiddie and guys that have been around the league for a bit, because you can't leave it all on Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook to bring everybody along. They've got their own roles and a lot of burdens on their shoulders, and you need some of these role players that are league veterans in the middle of that roster. And by making this trade and by bringing in those type of guys, I think Tommy Shepard and Wes Unseld Jr. have done that, and it looks more like a complete team because you've got some guys who have been around the league and know what it takes to win night in, night out, as opposed to such a young roster like they had last year.
Yeah. I will say though, I've been impressed with even the way that the young guys have grown. I mean, I think of Denny Avdia, and he's
Mm-hmm.
a much better defender, it seems like,
Yeah.
this year, and he's been able to hold his own on the wing. And so, yeah, getting those veterans and then having that growth that you want to see from those young guys, it's really the perfect combination, and I think it's helped lead to this 8-3 start.
Let's wrap up and talk hockey with the Washington Capitals, who many thought would have a little bit of a regression or relapse because it was one of the oldest rosters in the NHL when this season started. And to everyone's surprise, not only has the roster got younger in some ways involuntarily based on injuries and the Caps needing to sub in people, but they've placed themselves in second place in the Metropolitan Division behind one of the best teams in hockey, the Carolina Hurricanes. May be surprising to some, but many folks, myself included, thought that Carolina would have a good season with the level of talent and Sebastian Aho and the guys they have down there. Probably not this good at 10-1, but they are one of the best teams in the league, as are the Florida Panthers. So you've got some of those younger teams with younger talent from non-traditional markets are on top of the NHL this season. But for Washington, they've 5 different people have made their National Hockey League debuts in this season for Washington. Zach Fucale is just the latest, who got a shutout in his first start as goaltender after being called up from Hershey. So they continue to roll down the line with whatever plug and play, whatever whoever's there, whoever's ready to come and play and is slotted into this roster, and it hasn't caused much of a step back, more so a step forward. And a lot of that, I think, Matt, can be still attributed to Alex Ovechkin, who at age 36 is playing the same style of hockey in his career as we've always seen him play. No regression from the mean whatsoever. His 11 goals are tied for second in the league, and his 22 points are good for third in the league. And those typically aren't numbers you see in the NHL from a guy at his age, at this point in the season, early in the season, nearly leading the league in goals and points.
Yeah, no, it's really been incredible just the way that he's able to keep performing. And I don't necessarily know if it's surprising, but I think it's really impressive in the aspect of, Washington has all these injuries. TJ Oshie is out, Anthony Mantha's out, Nicholas Backstrom. Like the top guys, really in the top 6. Ovechkin and I guess Kuznetsov are really the only two like really potent offensive threats. And you know, my friend Stephen Wino, who covers the
Mm-hmm.
Capitals for the Associated Press, he pointed out that this feels like a season that the Capitals need Ovechkin to score, and if he scores, they win. If he doesn't, they lose. It's that type of season now.
Yeah.
The numbers don't necessarily bear that out exactly. Like Ovechkin has scored in games that they've lost, so on. But he's really done an impressive job of carrying that load for Washington, because who knows where they'd be without him.
Averaging 21 minutes a game, ice time wise, that's 8th among forwards in the league. And again, he's just regardless of his age, he's just a guy that's built differently. He continues his assault on the National Hockey League record books. In just this season so far, he's passed Marcel Dion and currently tied with Brett Hull after scoring his 741st goal in National Hockey League history. He will pass, assuming this pace and no injuries, will pass Jaromir Jagr, who he's 25 goals behind. Jagr's at 766. The question I posed to you, like everyone else from TNT and so on down, is can he catch Wayne Gretzky, only two people in NHL history have scored 800 goals, Wayne Gretzky and Gordie Howe. He is 153 goals behind Wayne Gretzky. And it's interesting because we don't talk in hockey about this statistical assault and stats chase like baseball. Baseball is a very heavily driven, sacred records from 62 to 750